Today's daf is daf Samach Gimel. We'll start from the top. And the Mishnah is addressing the Minchas Marcheshes and the Minchas Machvas. Ha'omer Olai, a man takes upon himself a pledge, a nedava, b'machvas, lo yovi b'marcheshes, or b'marcheshes lo yovi b'machvas. And it would seem from the language of the Mishnah that if he brought the wrong mincha, and he substituted machvas for marcheshes or vice versa, he's not yotze, and he has to still fulfill his neder. Ma bein machvas lemarcheshes, marcheshes yesh la kisui. This is the opinion of the first Tana in our Mishnah, that the difference between marcheshes and machvas is that whereas machvas is open, marcheshes is closed. It has a cover on it. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili. However, the Mishnah quotes a dissenting view of Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, and he says that marcheshes amuka, it's a deep pan, and therefore it has a lot of oil in it. Umasea rochashin, and as a result of the gurgling of the oil in this deep pan, you hear a rechisha. That's why it's called marcheshes. Rechisha means that sound of something that's bouncing around. Machvas, on the other hand, tsofa. Tsofa means it's a flat pan, umaser koshim, and it doesn't contain that much oil, so the dough doesn't get bloated up by the liquid oil, but rather it's solid, it's hard. So the Gemara is going to try to figure out why Rabbi Yossi Aglili came to his conclusion and why Rabbi Chanina came to his. My time at Rabbi Yossi, says the Gemara, Ilem marcheshes di asya arachushe alev. If maybe Rabbi Yossi Aglili analyzes the syntax of the word marcheshes, and the word marcheshes means when a person has thoughts to do something. Kirichsiv, where do I know that the word marcheshes, or shall we say the root of the word marcheshes, is indicative of something that you are motivated and stirred by your heart? Kirichsiv, as the pasuk says, Rachash libi. This is, I believe, Shlomo Melech. Let me just double check. No, this is David HaMelech in Tehillim. Rachash libi davar tov. And the opposite is also true, that just like your heart stirs you to do a good thing, it also stirs you to do chas v'shalom a bad thing. So therefore, if a person wants to bring a korban to transgress the wrong thoughts that he had, then he brings a marcheshes, which is rochash libi. So in other words, now his heart is stimulating him to do the good thing, the right thing, to try to bring a kapara for himself for having thoughts that were the wrong thing. However, umachvas, and the word machvas, the asya a machboe hapeh. Now, in terms of the marcheshes, as we said before, the stirring of the heart, that's not something that's visible to the naked eye. Nobody could see what your thoughts are, and therefore, if you have sinful thoughts, then that's appropriate for marcheshes, which has a cover on it, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, and the cover conceals the korban. By contrast, in the case of marcheshes, the word marcheshes, as we'll soon see from a pasuk in Tehillim, is referring to speech. Rashi gives an example of lashon hara, and therefore the asya amachboe apeh. So it's something that's exposed, because when you use your mouth to speak, it's something that other people can hear. Kira amri inchi, we have a similar colloquial phrase that people use, menabach nabuche. It emitting sound. So speech gives out sounds. People could hear the sounds, And if he was guilty of using his mouth and sounding out his mouth inappropriately, then the corresponding appropriate kapara would be the machvas, which is open. So the Gemara is not happy with this. The Gemara says, Ema ipcha. What about a different meaning that we can attribute to the word machvas? The asya amach boe alev. I'm going to prove to you that the word machvas reflects on something that's in your heart, that's not visible to the public. Tichsiv, because the pasuk tells us at the beginning in Sefer Bereshis, it says Lamanach Beisol Livrach. So we're talking about something that's in secret, right? Why have you fled secretly? And if this be the case, then maybe we should say just the opposite, that the machvas that you took upon yourself is a reference to the sin of the heart, not the sin of the mouth. And therefore the machvas should be covered so that it would be secret. Kida Amri Inshi, and again we have a colloquial phrase, Havamarachshin Sifsosecha, that you can see his lips are moving, but we don't hear anything. He's just moving his lips. And therefore, if he's just moving his lips, then, it's, oh no, I'm sorry. Just 1 second. So again, the way I understood it, he seems to have a different understanding, is that if somebody's moving his lips, not everyone knows what he's saying. So therefore the Maseches, the machvas should therefore be covered. Ella, the Gemara finally comes to the conclusion, Gemara Gmirale, we know that a Maseches is covered. We know that a machvas is uncovered. That's Rabbi Yossi Aglili, and it's Hilchus Gmirale that was passed down through the generations from our Sinai. Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel Omer, Marcheshes Amuka. How do we know, according to Rabbi Chanina, that a Marcheshes is a very deep pan? Tichsiv, we're going to base ourselves on a pasuk in Vayikra, in Perek Zayin. It says, V'chol nasa b'marcheshes. Right, a mincha that's made in a marcheshes. Now the word is ba'marcheshes. And if it's ba'marcheshes, then it means that it's somewhere within the walls of the marcheshes. And the marcheshes is not an open flat pan, but rather it's a deep pan that is surrounded by walls. So that's one thing as far as Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel is concerned. And in contrast, machvas tsofa. The machvas doesn't have walls. Tichsiv vi'al machvas. Because the pasuk in Vayikra referring to machvas, as in contrast to marcheshes, which says ba marcheshes, here it says al machvas. Al means that there's no depth. It's not bi inside, but rather Tana Rabbana, we learned in the Brayso Beit Shammai Omrim Omer Alai Marcheshes Yemunach Ad Sheyavo Eliyahu. We really don't know. At the end of the day, argues Beit Shammai, what does Marcheshes really mean? So we don't know if it's the way we understand Marcheshes, or maybe it's the way we understand Machvas, and therefore Yemunach, he cannot fulfill his neder because we don't know how to fulfill the neder. And therefore, Yemunach Ad Sheyavo Eliyahu. And the Gemara explains Beit Shammai is saying Mesafkele, he vacillates. He's on the trying to figure out al shum klinikro, al shum ma'asehem. The minchas marcheshes and the minchas machvas could be explained. The word, the name, either because of what kli you use, what utensil you use in preparing the mincha, or perhaps it's a reflection of what the Gemara calls ma'asehem. Ma'asehem means that the actual mincha. So if a person takes a neder to bring a marcheshes, we can interpret it as a neder to bring a minchas marcheshes. Or do we say no? Maybe he's only pledging to bring a kli, which would mean that we're dealing with kedushas damim and not kedushas guf, because a person could pledge to bring a gift to the Beis Hamikdash, just like in this week's parsha, the people of Israel brought pledged gifts to contribute to the building of the Mishkan. So we don't know whether or not the word marcheshes or the word machvas is referring to a kli, which is called machvas or called marcheshes, or it's referring to the mincha that's in the kli that's brought in a marcheshes or a machvas. And therefore, yemunach hachiyav yo. Now, I have two questions here, which I don't see anybody addressing this question. Number one, what does it mean, yemunach? I mean, if a person takes a pledge, which might mean that he has to bring a utensil, and that's his pledge, then l'chora he should have to bring it even on a suffix. So let me again go over this one more time to see maybe I made a mistake here. Ial shum kli nikro, which I understood means that he has to bring a kli. Let's see. Let me just see. Oh, here's what he says. Let's see if it fits with what I said. If a person pledges a marcheshes, he is pledging a utensil, not a mincha, but a utensil. Okay, so I'm not way off the charts here. So I'm just not sure what it means, hey munach, because if I have an obligation to pay hegdish, then I better pay it up, even if I don't know for sure that I owe it. Maybe, I'm just thinking out loud, maybe migdash is what's called mamon she'en lo tovim, meaning no one can really claim that you bring this kli, because hegdish is not like a baldover, like a malva, or a nizak, or anything like that. Anyway, Beis Hillel omrim kli haya v'migdash marcheses shma v'doma kimin klabus amok. Okay, so there was a kli that was used in the Beis Hamikdash, and it was called a marcheshes, and it looks like deep tongs. There's a picture in Rashi, but it seems that this picture is not really Rashi's picture, because it doesn't look like tongs in the picture. Anyway, kishabotek munach betocho, right? You put the dough inside this marcheshes, and doma kimin tapuche haberosim. Okay, so it looks like certain apples that come from a certain country. All right. Ukimin balute hayavanim, or it might look like the acorns of a Greek oak. Anyway, we see that marcheshes is actually utensil. Vi omer, and now he quotes a pasuk in Vayikra, and the pasuk says, "V'chol hanasa b'marcheshes v'al machvas." So therefore, the names themselves of machvas and marcheshes, clearly from the Torah itself, are given to describe the utensils themselves. Alma al shum kelim nikrov lo shum aseyim. So if a person pledges a marcheshes, the final maskon is like Beis Hillel, he has to bring that utensil. And this leads us to the Mishnah here. Okay, now here we're going to discuss what's called a minchas mafer, which breaks down into two possibilities. It's either matzos, otherwise known as chalos, or it's rikikin. And the question is, if a person took upon himself a pledge to bring a minchas mafer, then what does he bring? Now, the difference between chalos and rekikin is that chalos are baked with oil, rekikin are baked without oil. It's only that after the baking, you smear the oil on top of the rekikin, but the baking itself does not require oil in the case of rekikin. So harei alai b'tanur, a person takes upon himself a pledge to bring a minchas mafe, which is baked in a tanur, lo yavi mafe kupach. This is the first opinion in the Mishnah, and a kupach is not considered a tanur. A kupach is a small stove with only room for one pot. Okay, this has to do with the Gemara in Perakira in Shabbos. So that's not a tanur. Velo mafe re'ofim. Re'ofim are shingles, and they get very hot in the sun, and you could actually bake something on these shingles, but that's not considered a tanur. Umafe yoros ha'arvim. You can't bring it on Arabian ma'afe, which was a kind of a large pot in Arabia that was fired up, used to bake bread, but it's not a tanur. However, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and he says, Rotza mevi mafe bekupach. A kupach, even though there's only room, it's a very small stove, only room for one pot, nevertheless, it's still considered a tanur, and therefore he can fulfill his neder to bring a mafe in a kupach. Now, harei minchas mafe. Now we have a machlokes between the Chacham and Reb Shimon. We had this already in the past. According to Chachamim, lo yavi mechza chalos umechza rekik, and he has to bring total 10, and he can't bring 5 of this and 5 of that. Rabbi Shimon Matir allows you to bring 5 and 5. Neshu karban echad. So you can combine the two, and they're all considered one entity called a mafetanur. Ton Rabbanan. Mafetanur, v'lo mafe kupach, v'lo mafe rav ofim, v'lo mafe yoros ha'arvim. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, tanur shnei piyamid. There's an extra word tanur in the pasuk. Lahachshir mafe kupach. We have a ribui that extends the definition of tanur for the purpose of a mafe tanur of a mincha to include even a kupach. Rabbi Shimon Omer, tanur shnei piyamim. No. I agree that there is a double word tanur, but echad shetei afiyasam b'tanur v'echad shetei hekdesham b'tanur. The rivui here, according to Reb Shimon, is not that you could bring a baked mafet tanur in a kupach. No. But rather, the rivui is coming to teach you that there's 2 actions of hegdesh, of being magdish, in the case of a mafet tanur. Number 1, you need an afiyah b'tanur. V'echad shetei hekdesham b'tanur. In other words, that the tanur actually plays 2 roles. On the one hand, it functions to create an afiyah, whether it's chalos or whether it's rekikin. Both require afiyah, so that's the purpose of the tanur. But the Torah adds another word tanur to teach you that despite the fact that you are magdish b'kedushas peh, and you designated these matzos or the rekikin as hegdesh, that's only kedushas haguf. But the actual kedushas, that's only kedushas domim. But the actual kedushas haguf is generated by the afiyah in the tanur. As the tanur is a kli shores, that which is baked in the tanur becomes kodesh b'kedushas haguf. Frek the Gemara, umi islay Reb Shimon svara. Is it possible that Reb Shimon holds that you need the tanur in order to sanctify the carbon? Vatanya, vatanan. We have a Mishnah later on that Rabbi Shimon Omer li olam Adam heavy ragil omar shtei alechem v'lechem aponim ksheros ba'azara uksheros bebeis pagi. Now, beis pagi is outside of the azara, and yet we have a statement in the Mishnah of Reb Shimon that a person can say that he wants to bring shtei lechem and lechem aponim, not only in the azara, but even in beis pagi. Now, if beis pagi is outside the azara, then how could you bake it in beis pagi, the shtei lechem v'lechem aponim, when Rabbi Shimon holds in our Mishnah that you need kiddush b'tanur? Well, if it's kiddush b'tanur, the kiddush b'tanur has to take place in the azara. It can't take place in the beis pagi. Amar Rava Ema, maybe we should reformulate Rabbi Shimon shehekdishon l'shum tanur. In other words, when you magdish it, you have to be magdish for the sake of baking it in the tanur. It doesn't have to be that you actually bake it in the tanur. So that now, according to Rava, it would seem that when he's magdish the mincha, and he declares, I want to be magdish the kemach for the purpose of being baked in the oven, and it's not enough that he just is magdish the flour. He has to spell out and formulate exactly the purpose of his baking, specifically in an oven. And this, we don't understand why. In any event, harei olai minchas mafel lo yovi mechza ton rabbanon v'chisakriv. And this is going to be the machlokas here about what is considered a minchas mafeh. The Torah says v'chisakriv. Let's get the whole pasuk. V'chisakriv korban mincha mafeh tanur solis chalos matzis plus b'shem rikike matzis mishuka b'shomen. Kshetakriv lasos dvar rishus. Now, what does this mean, a dvar rishus? That the korban is a korban adova rather than a korban chova. And then again, the next part of the pasuk says korban mincha. Rabbi Yehuda, minayin li omer rei olai minchas mafi, takes upon himself to bring a baked mincha. Shelo yavi mechza chalos u'mechza rikikin tamalomer korban mincha. Korban echad amarti lecha v'lo shnayim u'shlosha korbanos. Meaning, Rabbi Yehuda holds that there's a korban mincha which is called matzos or chalos. There's another korban mincha which is called rikikin. But there's no third korban. And to say that you can integrate both chalos and rikikin to form a whole new entity of a korban, that would violate the principle of korban echad amarti lecha. So if he brings chalos, that's korban echad. If he brings rikikin, that's korban echad. But if he would bring them both, 5 of each, that's already shnayim, that's already 2 korbanos. Okay, so that's the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Now we're on Daf Samach Gimel Amid Beis, and we're studying the shita of Rabbi Shimon and how he derives the conclusion that you can bring a minchas mafeh that's made up of 5 chalos and 5 rikikin. B'chi nemar, does it say in the pasuk korban shnei pi amim? You're assuming, Rabbi Yehuda, that there's one korban of minchas mafeh that's called chalos, and another korban mincha that's called minchas rikikin. But then it should have said the word korban twice. Valolo nemar el korban echad. The Torah only says one korban. V'nemar bo chalos urikikin. And with regard to that one single korban, the Torah specifies chalos urikikin, which could mean that you bring all of chalos, all of rikikin, or one korban of chalos and rikikin. And therefore, the final conclusion says Rabbi Shimon, Ratzalavi chalos mevi, rikikin mevi, mechza chalos and mechza rikikin mevi. Now, if he's bringing like Rabbi Shimon advocates, 5 chalos and 5 rikikin in one korban, then how does he end up with one hakrava for both? And the answer is bolalon v'kometz mishneya. While he's preparing the dough, then bolalon. Okay, so let's see. This is not so simple. See, we didn't learn the sugya yet of prisa. Prisa means you have to break up the bread. So that happens after baking when it's bread. Then you break it up, and then the Torah requires that you return it to the state of flour, and you make fine meal out of it. At that point, he's going to mix together the rekikim with the matzos. And now he has flour that has both rikikin and matzos or chalos, and now he could do the kmitza from both of them. However, Rashi seems to add another element into the equation here, which the Mefarshim have problems with, and that is that they take the chalos and the rikikim and mix it together with oil. That's not so posh because rikikim don't have oil. Anyway, v'im komatz, we go back to the brayso. So v'ola v'yodo mi'echad al shneim. Let's say he does the kmitza, and he realizes that what he grabbed onto in the kmitza is only wafers, or pieces of wafers, or pieces of chalos. Yotza. Nevertheless, he was yotza. In other words, as long as he did the blila, and he integrated them both into one flour, and he did a maisa kmitza. It doesn't matter whether that kmitza brought up this chalos or this rikikin. It doesn't matter. Once they were mixed together, that's enough. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Omer Minayli Omer Arelai Minchas Mafet Shlo Yovi Mechza Chalos Umechza Rikikin. Now notice, Rabbi Yossi is the son of Rabbi Yehuda. And at first glance, we're anticipating that Rabbi Yossi, will just reiterate exactly what he was makabel from his father. But we're going to see that there's a difference between the two. Talmud Lomer v'chol mincha asher teofer betanu v'chol anasa b'marcheshes v'al machvas lakoin ha'makavos lo tiyeh v'chol mincha blula v'shem v'charev v'chol b'nei Aaron tiyeh. So let's look at the two words v'chol. At the beginning of the pasuk it says v'chol, and at the end of the pasuk again it says v'chol. So Rabbi Yossi darshans the following: Ma v'chol homer lemata. So the pasuk lemata is talking about what we call two sets of menachos, shnei minim chalukim, is therefore, right, because it has both marcheshes and machvas, is af v'chol amar lamala. So we go back to the beginning of the pasuk. It says v'chol mincha shed teyofer b'tanur is shnei minim chalukim. So the word chalukim here means that just like machvas and marcheshes at the end of the pasuk are two separate things, you can't have both. It's one or the other. So too, the word v'chol at the beginning of the pasuk, referring to minchas mafeh, it's either or. It's either rikikin or it's chalos. It can't be both. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Shapir Ka'omer Reb Shimon. First of all, what is Rabbi Yehuda going to do with the argument of Reb Shimon? Meaning the Gemara holds that Reb Shimon's argument is very good. It doesn't say carbon twice, as if to say that there's one carbon minchas mafeh from rikikin, another one from chalos, but rather there's one carbon. So if the Torah then delineates both chalos and rikikin, it has to be that those two integrate into one carbon. Amalei, Kevon, Dichsiv, Bashemen, Bashemen. I'm going to derive this from another pasuk where it says Bashemen, Bashemen. And I'll read the pasuk. It's in Vayikra Perek Beis. We'll read it in Mitzvah the Shabbos. V'chis akriv carbon mincha mafeh tanur soles. Okay, so it doesn't say bashemen until after it says soles, chalos matzvu bashemen. And then it says rikike matzos, mishuchim bashemen. So we have bashemen twice. So therefore, it says I don't need to look for the word carbon twice, if I have the word beshemen twice. And the word beshemen repeated twice is going to teach me, argues Rabbi Yehuda, that we have this carbon called chalas that needs shemen, and then we have this carbon which is rikikin that needs shemen. Reb Shimon, what is Reb Shimon going to argue against this drasha of Rabbi Yehuda, the double language bashemen? Iloksiv bashemen. I need the double language of Bashem for something totally, entirely different. It has nothing to do with setting up two different karbonos, one of chalas and one of rikikim, but rather Havamina would have said, if not for the double language of Bashemen, dafka mechza chalas and mechza rikikim. That the only way you could bring, because again it says carbon only once, and then it says rikikim and chalas is only if you integrate 5 rikikim with 5 chalas, aval chalas lachude or rikikim lachude, emelo kamashwan. I need the double language of Bashemen. Frek the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Hainu Avua. Is he just reiterating what he heard from his father? And the Gemara answers, Ike benayu dieved. What would be dieved if he brought one carbon, like Rabbi Shimon, half rikikin and half chalas? According to Rabbi Yehuda, it could be kosher b'dieved. That's what Rashi says over here. We'll try to understand why. But according to Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, it would not be valid. So the answer is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, you could bring only one carbon. So if you went ahead and you brought half and half, so why would that be kosher? The Torah is saying that you have to bring a carbon, one single carbon, and it could be made up of chalos or rikikin, and that means l'chatchila you shouldn't make it both chalos and rikikin, but not b'di'eved. It's not possible. So let's just think about it one more time. What does this mean? In other words, the worst sin, so to speak, the worst aver that he's doing, Mishkan Felach, is that he brought 2 karbanos when the Torah said 1 carbon. So although l'chatchila it certainly should have been 1 carbon of either chalos or rikikim, but okay, so he brought 2 karbanos. However, Rabbi Yossi derives the psul from the pasuk in Vayikra that compares the 2 different types of minchas mafer to the final set of menachos, the mincha which is mixed with oil, the mincha to which no oil, meaning chalos or rikika. Now, if the sinner's mincha was to be mixed with a voluntary mincha, would disqualify even after the fact, since he's mixing 2 menachos. And now he has an analogy to minchas mafer. Okay. So basically, we're introducing, according to Rabbi Yossi, what's called a minchas chote, which is an obligatory mincha, as opposed to our discussion here is about a minchas nedava. So let's go back to Rabbi Yossi for a minute. Where is it? Sorry. Yes. Chol mincha sheteofe betanur, and kol mincha blula b'shem charev. Again, ma v'chol ha'omer lemato shnei minim chalukim. What does that mean? Ah, so the pasuk mentions mincha that's mixed with oil, which is a mincha soles, a voluntary mincha. And then it mentions a mincha which is totally dry without oil. That's the minchas chote or the minchas knos of the sota. And just like in the case of minchas chote, as opposed to minchas soles, we have two distinct karbonos, totally different one from the other. One is dry and one is with oil. So too, with regard to Minchas Mafe, which again we have the pasuk v'chol in the same pasuk, it's got to be two distinct karbonos. And if you substitute, or for that matter, integrate rikikin with chalos, then you're not yotze. That's ma'akiv even b'dia. And now we begin the sixth perek of Menachos, the perek called Rabbi Shmuel. Now, this parak has to do with what you're allowed to do on Shabbos and what you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Shahayabah b'Shabbos. Okay, so we're talking about a machlokas tanoim in a case where the 16th of Nisan falls on a Shabbos. And now the 16th of Nisan, you have to bring a korban Omer. And the question is, how many se'in of flour are you going to bring for that korban omer? So first we start with the Shita Rabbi Shmuel. He says, shalosh se'in. So we're talking about sa'orim for a korban, for the korban minchas ha'omer. And at the end of the day, we need that the flour that's going to be prepared is made up of one isaron of solas. And in order to achieve the one isaron of solas, then on Shabbos we're going to have to do it the barest minimum, says Rabbi Shmuel. This is called in the yeshivish language dechuya. Dechuya means that, okay, we have to do it on Shabbos, but let's try to limit the extent of violation of the Shabbos. That's Rabbi Shmuel. And therefore you're going to suffice with 3 se'in of Siorin. That's not mitzvah min muvchar, because bechol, when we don't have a Shabbos problem, the 16th of Nisan is on a weekday, then bechamesh. Then we're going to have 5 se'in. And what's the advantage of 5 se'in? He says that when you harvest 5 se'in of barley in this case, and then you put the flour from each sa'ah of the 5 into a sieve and collect a small amount of fine flour that emerges first, the initial flour would be of best quality. Okay? So again, we don't know all the details yet. The Gemara is going to get into it, but the basic principle is that if you go up to 5 se'in of reaped barley and you prepare fine flour from it, you'll get the finest product of minchas soles. The Chacham hold that you can suffice even during the weekday with 3 se'in, and it won't improve anything if you add another 2 se'in of barley. Now we have another machlokas in this Mishnah. Rav Chanina Skan HaKohanim Omer, b'Shabbos hoyeniktzar b'yochid. Notice how many Kohanim are involved in preparing the barley for the Omer. According to Rav Chanina, it's going to be biyochid. We're going to have one single Kohen going out there and not sure if it has to be a Kohen, but anyway, going out there and cutting down the barley. Memagal echad, bekupa achas. And he's only going to use one sickle and one basket. That's on Shabbos. Ubechol, however, during the weekday, bishlosha, we'll have three kohanim, three kupos, three maglos, and that's called, as we'll see in the Gemara, berov am hadras melech. Chachamim omrim echad Shabbos ve'echad chol bishlosha. Even on Shabbos, we can get three people involved in sholosh kupas, sholosh magolas, because the Chachamim say that I'd rather have Shabbos violated by multiple people who are going to do less malachos, whereas Rabbi Chanina Skan HaKohanim would rather prefer one Kohen, even though he's going to do multiple malachos, but it's only one Kohen. So Gemara says, Bishleim Rabbanon Kasavri Sarim Muvchar B'Shlosh Sinasi. Rabbanon are very straightforward. Sholosh Se'in are fine even on a weekday because you could produce the finest, choicest flour, what's called soles, fine flour, from Sholosh Se'in. Therefore, Loshna, we're on the top now of Samach, I'm sorry, we're still on the bottom of Samach Gimel base, sorry. Loshna b'chol, loshna b'Shabbos. So what difference make with Shabbos and chol? You could do fine with three se'in. Ella, Rabbi Shmuel, my kasam, I don't get it. How do you slice the oil, the flour? If the mitzvah mina muvchar is to get the best, finest flour, but you need for that three se'in, is then afilu b'Shabbos nami. That which enhances the kiyum mitzvah should override the Shabbos. But if, on the other hand, he agrees with the Chachamim that you don't need more than three se'in, and you'll get the finest flour, is afil b'chol nami. So why does he say that on a weekday he should get five se'in? Amar Rava kasav Yishmael Yisar muvchar below tircha osi michamesh. The best, finest flour, without any extra effort, you can get from five se'in in order to achieve your isara. B'tircha, if you're going to hack away with a great deal of sweat and toil at the flour, then enochinami osi misholosh, you could actually, sift out your flour and end up with fine flour even from three se'in. B'chol ma'asina michamesh. During the weekday, when there's no problem of adding in other words, when your goal is just simply to enhance the mincha, is kevan. I'm sorry, where am I? Is you bring chamesh dehachi shvicha milsa, right? We're gonna jack up the number of se'in from 3 to 5 because that's going to produce a superior flour, and that's going to achieve the kiyum of zekelim yavev, the beautifying the mitzvah. But b'Shabbos mutav sheyar b'melacha achas bar koda v'al yar b'melachas harbe. In other words, if you're going to add 2 se'in in order to jack it up to 5 se'in on Shabbos like you did in a weekday, then there are a heck of a lot of malachas that you have to do to get those extra 2 se'in. You've got to cut them down, which is malachas ktsira, and what else? And you got to do harkada in order to to yield fine flour. You're going to have to sift it and get rid of this, and you have to the whole bunch of malachas involved. And therefore, yarbe malachas harbe. So what do? Instead, you bring 3 se'in. You don't have to reap another 2 se'in and hack away at them. Just hack away at these 3 se'in, and eventually, after you do a lot of tircha, you'll end up with zekelim yaveu, a perfect, beautiful, as if there were 5 se'in. Amar Rabba, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yishu ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Amru Dover Echad. Okay, this is a whole whole sugi. Rabbah is going to make a connection between what we saw in our Mishnah Rabbi Shmuel, where he wants to dechuya means he wants to limit the violation of Shabbos, and connect that with Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. I'm sorry, with Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. Okay, fine. The Sanya, okay, now we're on Erev Pesach, and the question is, there's a requirement according to the Torah of Hafshotas Ha'or, meaning in order to get the Imurim and the Chalovim then have to be burnt on the Mizbech for the Korban Pesach, you have to strip or flay the hide of the Korban Pesach, the lamb. And now it's Arbasa Shechalios B'Shabbos. The 14th of Nisan is on Shabbos. Before we discuss the 16th of Nisan on Shabbos. Mafshid es ha-Pesach alechasa. Oh, Rabbi Shmuel, who's the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, wants to limit the amount of violation of the Shabbos and therefore flay it up until the end of the chest. And that's sufficient because since it's not necessary to flay it all the way down to the feet, then let's limit the amount of violation of the Shabbos. Take it apart and flay the entire thing. And the Gemara is going to explain why, because it's very degrading to the animal that, this is a carbon, and it's carbon Pesach. Very degrading that half of it is flayed and the other half is just like exposed. So Milo Omar Rabbi Shmuel Benoshel Broka Hossam isn't the logic that underlies Rabbi Shmuel. This is Rabbah talking. Kol hecha di efshar lo tarchinon. Since it's possible to be yotze the carbon, and the carbon will be kosher if you only flay it up until the chest, and then you have exposed the avarim and the chalovim that have to be burnt on the mizbech, everything is fine. It's hachinami here too, in the case of the carbon ha'omer, kevan di efshar lo tarchinon. Since it's possible to get away with 3 sayin, then we don't want all the extra malachas that have to be done by reaping another 2 sayin. So Gemara rejects it for a number of reasons. But the first one is, mimai. What kind of comparison is that? Dilma, so Gemara is going to go through both possibilities. The Gemara is going to say that Rabbi Shmuel could reject Rabbi Shmuel Benoshel and the other way around. So first, Dilma, Ad kan lo kam Rabbi Shmuel Hachad. When does Rabbi Shmuel say limit it to 3 sayin? That's only the lekav zayin kodshin, because at the end of the day, you're going to end up with the same fine flour as if you had 5 sayin. So limit the amount of tircha, the amount of malacha. But in the case where you flay the animal, the carbon pesach, the lamb, up till its chest, and then the rest of it you leave exposed, that's already called bizayin kodshim. That's humiliating to the kodshim. And here we turn to Daf Samach Dalid, b'siyata d'shma. Eimel lecha k'Rabbanan tzvila. Maybe he'll agree with the Rabbanan that we have to flay the entire animal, not to leave it that way in such a humiliating way. Inami, now we're going to go the other direction. Ad kan lo kama Rabbi Shmuel ben Osher Rokon Rokon Hatzam. Why does Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, say what he says? Namely, that what? That you should only flay half of the animal, half of the korban pesach. Ela disavid le tzorach gavoa, v'lo tzorach achule Shabbos. Halacha to lo disavid le tzorach gavoa v'tzorach achule Shabbos ema kirabanon sfira le. Okay, so here the Gemara introduces a concept, which hopefully we'll finish up in 2 minutes, and that is Sorech Gavoha. Okay then? So, in the case of the Korban Pesach, what we're saying is that whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs from the Haktorah of the Emurim of the Korban Pesach, he'll receive, so to speak. That's called Tzor Kavod. And therefore, there's no need to be Mechal Shabbos by doing more of the flaying, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu will receive exactly what he has to receive, Kaviyachol. But in the case of the Omer, here it could be that Rabbi Shmuel ben Nosha or Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka would agree that we have to cut down 5 se'in, and it means an extra chil Shabbos. And why is that so? Because it's litzorach avoah. Tzorach avoah means he's enhancing the solace, and he's fulfilling zekel v'aveu, giving Hashem something that's mehudar, something that's more beautiful. So I'll just read this quickly. Tzorach avoah denotes that which is essential or enhances the sacrificial service or the sacrifice itself. In the case of skinning the Pesach, this need is satisfied by flaying as far as the breast, since that suffices to allow the removal of the parts that are burnt on the Mizbeach. And that's why Rabbi Shmuel says, you know what? Don't go beyond the breast. But in the case of the Omer, we have a tzorach avoah. Why? Because if you have 5 se'in and barley, then that larger amount enhances the quality of the sacrifice, and therefore Rabbi Shmuel ben Osha ben Broka would accept the Shitas Chachamim that however much barley is reaped on a weekday must also be reaped on Shabbos, because it's all a tzorach avoah. And even though the Rabbanan say that you should permit only 3 son on Shabbos, that's consistent with their view that 3 son are enough even during the week. But apparently more barley would be a tzorach avoah. Okay, then. So this is where we're going to stop for today, and we'll start tomorrow on Daf Sayata D'Shmaya Mirz Hashem.